what is the difference between the narrative we inherited about like how we're supposed to be loving each other and showing up and the reality that we really want? What is the narrative we inherited about what our families are supposed to be and the reality that we want or could be possible?
Hey friends, my name is Gabby Rosalie, and this is the Crucial Conversations podcast, a platform dedicated to self-fulfillment and breaking the cycle of wasted potential. Using the tools of perspective, knowledge, wisdom, and awareness, I, with the help of qualified expert guests, share free insight and proven strategies that lead to all forms of success. If you are ready to start investing in yourself and living the life of your dreams, because I promise it is possible for all of us, you came to the right place. Together, we will help each other level up and have the crucial conversations necessary to do so. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gabby Rosalie, your host of the Crucial Conversations podcast, and we are back with another episode, and I am very, very eager to welcome Nathan Young as a guest to our podcast today. We're in the holiday season, so we're going to be slowing down, hopefully, not staying too busy, and connecting with the people that we love, connecting deeply with the present moment and the holiday spirit. And a big part of the connection that we are able to experience with our loved ones comes to fruition when we tell stories and when we receive the stories of other people. Because when we share our own story and we receive that of others, we feel deeply connected to them. So today, Nathan Young, who is the owner and founder of StoryCulture Consulting, is going to be talking to us all about what storytelling is and how we all use it, every single one of us as human beings. For over 12 years, he's been helping leaders, teams, and organizations harness the power of storytelling to connect, inspire, and lead the narrative. He's worked with organizations like TEDx, Save the Children, the Alzheimer's Association, the YMCA, the University of California in San Diego, where I actually went briefly for a couple of months before I transferred home, and Indiana University, many others as well. And today we're going to be talking about telling stories. Reason being, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we choose to listen to, become the stories of our lives. And when we're going to learn today about how narratives influence our identities and how telling stories can heal trauma, connect us more deeply with ourselves and others, and how to tell a kick-ass story to build your brand and expand your network of influence and opportunity. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So we're going to get this one out of the way because it's a very generic question. What is storytelling? How do you define it? Why do we need it? What is it?
So storytelling, it's a big part of how we as humans connect with each other and understand each other. And there's two ways I usually try to talk about it. And one is the way that we commonly think of it, which is, a story, like you're telling a story once upon a time, this happened, then that happened, then that happened. This is what went on in my day. And so there's like that piece of storytelling. But the other piece of storytelling really gets down to how we as humans make sense of the world, because we use storytelling to create meaning and to help us understand the world around us and what we see and where we fit into the world and how it all makes sense. So those are the kind of two big pieces of how I talk about storytelling.
Awesome. And I think that we tell stories more than we may realize. And you're right. When I think of story, initially I'm thinking once upon a time, bedtime story, okay, a fairy tale. But realistically, a story is simply a narrative. It is something that you are rehearsing in your mind. It's the story of your identity, the story of your career, the story of your athletic journey, whatever it is. We're always, always, always telling stories.
Yeah, totally.
So can you explain why it's intrinsic to the human experience? Like, how does it shape the understanding that we have of the world?
Yeah. Well, then to kind of build off what you just said there too, I always talk about how we always have like a narrative worldview and a narrative self-identity. We always see ourselves in relation to the way that we're relating to these stories. And so, you're at a spot in your career, you probably have a story for yourself about why you're there. Maybe you're a go-getter. Maybe you got lucky. Maybe you, had a good idea, but you've got a story, a reason why you're there. And there's probably some truth to it, but part of that story is like, serves you one way or another in ways you might not realize. And so the way it's like so intrinsic is because this is how we as humans, our early ancestors, evolved to process information. And it gave our early ancestors a lot of evolutionary advantages. And the main one being is that they could make up stories and tell stories to each other about how they might interact with new situations that they found in new environments and how they might make sense of those things. And so storytelling created an opportunity to collaborate and to share information across generations, which is a completely new concept. And it also sort of like superseded what would have normally been like our instincts. So I don't know. Do you have a dog or anything like that, Gabby, at all? Or?
I have 2 Jack Russell Terriers.
Okay.
Love them to death.
Okay. So I don't know. Are your dogs the type where like they see a rabbit or a squirrel, they're like, kill, get it, gotta go. Like,
oh, 1,000%.
Okay, so
1,000%.
yeah. And so they're just like right away. They're like, all right, I got to go after that squirrel. I got to go after that rat. After whatever they got, whatever they see there, and that's just their instincts at work that says like, kill that thing or chase it, whatever. We as humans, we see like a rabbit, we're like, a rabbit. Like, and our ancestors like probably ate rabbits, but we would have said like, should I chase that rabbit, or do I have enough food at home already? Should I, do I have a chance of actually catching that rabbit? I got an idea. What if I go back to my village, I get all my friends together, and we make a plan for how we could catch a bunch of rabbits together, like teamwork. And yeah, that was just how a group or a tribe or a set of individuals that could start thinking about their world that way, that inferred upon them a lot of advantages, and also, enabled our earliest ancestors, like we said, we colonized the whole world as humans, and that made us go in all these different environments and all these different places and go after all these different ways of how to live, how to survive, how to thrive. And that was all very, very, very much attuned to storytelling as the modus operandi for how we communicated with ourselves, each other, and across generations too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because when you really think about it, there's so much that we miss when we just like glaze over the idea of it all. But it literally builds our reality. Like it builds not only our relationship to the reality that we're experiencing, but it actually constitutes the reality that we are experiencing. So it's not just the perception of it, but it's really like the alignment of the things we're bringing into our auric field when we tell that story, because then it's like, okay, we're filtering that experience through the narrative. And that's why I think it's so important. So you talk a lot about narrative leadership in your work. And I know that you have a framework that consists of 3 core elements. So I want to talk about narrative leadership, but I want to branch this in a way that everybody can utilize this framework, not just if they are a leader in a corporation. And I know, we're all leaders in our own way, in our own lives, but what is narrative leadership and how can we employ it?
Yeah. So narrative leadership is a concept I came up with of just over the years. I've been teaching storytelling and helping organizations with storytelling. So working with leaders, or even just people that have to give a talk. And one of the things that would come up is I could teach people about like what makes a good story and how to tell a good story, but it didn't necessarily mean they were out there telling good stories after that. There was something deeper at play that I had to figure out how to get to. And one of the things that came up for me to really understand this is like this piece I just told you about how we as humans make sense of the world through storytelling, and we also make sense of ourselves through the stories we tell ourselves. But another piece of it too came down to this idea of ethos, pathos, logos. And I don't know if you're familiar with this at all. Are you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's a way of, a rhetorical way of making arguments, or rhetoric is the concept, and it's credited to Aristotle, but it's a way of making like persuasive arguments. And the first part is like ethos. It's like who you are. And the second part is pathos, which is like the emotional pitch of your argument. And the third part is logos, which is like the logical pitch of your argument. And maybe you probably know this already. Like they sort of say that like ethos is like 80% of your argument. So who you are, your credibility, the reasons the way people might be predisposed to believe you in the first place. And then your emotional pitch is like 20%, and the logical pitch is like 0.5%. So
yeah, and I want to stop you for one second, because I just want to reiterate that this framework can be used for you're selling a product, you're selling yourself, you are selling an experience. You don't have to be tangibly selling something. You might be selling the idea. You might be selling, the relationship. So I want everybody to know that you are able to employ this framework, whether you're selling a tangible good or not. You are in a world that requires you to almost sell I don't want to say sell yourself, but it's like allow other people to understand you enough so that your worth and your purpose is shining through you, through your words, through your story. So just wanted to say that. So totally. Continue, please.
Well, that's a great point too, because I think about this a lot. Like this occurred to me, something like dating apps, and we're just right swiping, left swiping. And I know that a lot of like people get ghosted, doesn't really take off. And it's because there's no ethos there. There's no way of like actually like connecting. That whole the whole connection on a dating app is all just like that pathos, like you sort of put a
surface level.
Yeah. It's surface level. And you're kind of putting a story on this person that like maybe you can get excited about, or they're going to seem great, but you have no idea who this person actually is, where they come from, how you're going to relate to them at all, because there's no ethos there. And so that's, I don't know. Side note.
Yeah, dating apps are not, they are not for me. I always said, like, I have friends who have met the love of their lives on dating apps. And I was like, I would try and I would have these like matches or whatever. And then I would be like, oh, this is a chore to respond to them. I don't feel connected to these people whatsoever. I knew that I was going to meet my person organically, and I have now, and I'm so happy, but I knew it wasn't going to be on a dating app.
Yeah, totally. Because it's very surface level, and there's no like kind of investment in a community, which is communities imply come from ethos, come from this like understanding of each other. So that was really kind of one of the frameworks, that ethos, pathos, logos of narrative leadership. That was really one of the frameworks, and another big piece of it was embodied leadership too, like how we understand ourselves and our own emotions and our own traumas too. And so the concept of narrative leadership, kind of roundabout way of getting into it. So it's basically, there's 3 stories you tell. And one of the story is, it's the story you share outwardly about who you are and what you're doing and where you're going. And so it's actually like your vision, what you're trying to create in the world, so people can get on board with that and really sort of see where you're going with your life and your plans and your vision. And then the next story is about like sharing a little bit more about who you are and where you've been. And this is a story to build up your ethos, so people get to know you as a person and why you are that person, to see that vision through. And then the third story is the story you tell yourself, and it's how you relate to yourself and understand yourself, and how you make sure that you're telling yourself stories that reflect reality in a positive way for you, and you're not letting yourself get beat down by stories that don't help you. You're not letting yourself get too hyped up by stories that make you bigger than maybe you might be, but finding that right balance in the way that you're telling the story to yourself about who you are and what you're capable of too.
Very cool. Very, very cool. And I think that sometimes the stories, actually, I would argue that out of the 3, the stories that we tell ourselves are the most important, because I don't think that we are able to effectively communicate our story to others, or the story of our vision, or, of who we are, unless the stories that we're telling ourselves are, again, like you said, in a positive light.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And this is just it, because a lot of times it takes, for people to be good storytellers and want to be able to share their story outwardly, it does take some confidence, and it does take some security in yourself too. And so if you can't tell yourself that story to help you with that confidence and make you feel like you are a person worthy of sharing your story outwardly or seeing your vision through, you're going to have a hard time pitching that to other people as well. And so ends up being a big part of the work I do with clients, both on organizational level and an individual level, to really like figure out what these stories are that we're telling ourselves all day, and if they're true or helpful, and what better stories could be.
So what advice, and I know that we talked offline about the advice question, it's like the plague, to come up with on the spot, but what advice would you give to someone, an individual who is struggling aligning their personal story with their vision for the future? So it's like, maybe I want to create this company or this brand or this vision, this idea, and it is centered around community, and maybe it's in public speaking. That's what I'm in. So I'm going to use that as an example. But maybe the story that I'm telling myself is that I'm not capable, I'm not worthy, I'm dumb. Like I have these things kind of going on in my head. Thankfully, I don't. Sometimes I do. I won't lie. But what would you advise someone who struggles with the story that they're telling themselves? How can we build that story up? How can we reframe that story so that then we can tell the stories in the other 2 areas more effectively?
So this is going to be kind of a complicated answer, but I think it's really valuable. And I think it'll probably go into the next question a little bit too. I really think that a lot of our challenges essentially comes down to trauma, because what happens is if we get, and it sounds like your listeners are probably attuned to what this idea of trauma is, right? I'm guessing so.
Yes.
And especially that kind of complex trauma where we just sort of inherit these relational traumas from our family of origin, where maybe we didn't feel quite safe or quite connected or quite loved with our caregivers enough. And so we have these sort of sets of like self-doubts that get keyed into our brains and keyed into our minds and our bodies about, whether people do love us, whether we are worthy of love. And what will happen if we try to speak out and make ourselves big. And again, this is another example of how storytelling kind of gets down to an instinctual level, because what's happening there is your body feels unsafe. You had got that coded into you when you were very young, that you might not be safe because you depend on your caregivers 100% for your own survival when you're very young. That's how we evolved. And so if you don't feel like you're getting that adequate care from your caregivers, you feel like you're in mortal danger. And then that gets encoded in your brain. And then you make up stories to make sense of that sense of mortal danger that you're feeling pretty much nonstop. And so if you're feeling like you're in this like mortal danger, you're not going to speak up at the meeting and share your ideas. You're not going to feel like you're the person that should be up on stage sharing their story, because you do have this sort of like sense of moral danger just percolating in your mind and all throughout your body in a way that doesn't really make logical sense, but it's there. And this is part of what trauma does to us.
Trauma sometimes when we think of trauma, it's like we think of the worst possible things, like, sexual assault or, whatever it is, we think of like the extreme when we think of trauma. But because trauma is such a buzzword now, I have like felt a little bit of resistance and aversion in myself whenever I hear the word trauma come up, because I'm like, okay, this sounds like a broken freaking record. Like what? Like why are we trying to convince everybody that they are traumatized? But I almost look at it more so of like, okay, anything that has happened in your past, any experience that you've had, emotions that you felt as a result of those things that you're storing in your body, in your heart, in your mind, and your thought patterns, those neural pathways, anything that separated you from your essence of who you are, from the nature of love and abundance that I believe we come from. That's what I believe trauma is. It's not like you witnessed your mom murdered your dad. And if you did, I am so sorry. That is absolutely traumatic, the best possible use of the word, right? But then there are things like, you had a boy as a little girl make fun of the shoes that you wore in fourth grade, like little things like that, that made you feel like you weren't worthy, that made you feel exactly like you said, unloved. So when I think of trauma, really it's any experience that puts you in a position to question your worth. That's what I believe that trauma is. And when we take it to an extreme, it can be a lot more than that. But when we look at it through that lens, we realize that our experiences are not something that we need to run away from or categorize through this negative lens as, awful. But yes, they have separated us from this feeling of abundance and wholeness that is our birthright. So
yeah, totally. And I love the way you phrase that too, because I struggled with the same thing for a long time of being like, no, I don't think I'm traumatized. I grew up in the suburbs. Right. It was fine, but then also realizing that I did, had a lot of emotional and mental health problems all the way up until, really realizing that and understanding that. And then when I did read about complex trauma, I was like, oh, this is it. This is all of it. This connects the dots between, why I struggle in relationships and why I used to drink way too much and why now I eat too much and, all these things. It connects the dots there. And essentially what this is like, these are just survival instincts run amok in our modern world. And I think that's maybe another way of thinking about it. And a lot of times this manifests as shame a lot. And shame is the survival instinct. It keeps you, it tells you like, stay small, don't get noticed. Like that way nobody will see you and want to, beat you back down. So this is what you're going to do. And if that ends up being like the big challenge that so many of us humans deal with. And then if we're stuck in shame, we're going to be hiding big parts of ourselves. We can't connect with people. So we're going to feel that like lack of connection and all these things. So yeah, you get it. You know this stuff.
Exactly. 1000% I get it. So sorry to go off on that tangent.
Okay.
Now let's return to where we were going with that. So if the story that I'm telling myself is shameful and, I have these traumas that maybe I'm holding on to that are influencing my thought patterns and my feelings about myself, which are influencing my identity, which are influencing the way that I show up in the world and in my relationships. How do we reframe that? Where do we start?
So I think one of the most important practices here is just self-compassion. And talking to yourself, I mean, you talk about this all the time, like talking to yourself the way a loving parent would talk to a child, talk to yourself the way that you would talk to a friend who's going through something difficult. Because I don't know, what's your internal dialogue like? Is it like, Gabby, you're the best, you're greatest, you got everything? Or is it like, oh, Gabby, what are you doing with your life? What's happening? What's going on?
I made a comment to my mom the other day. I was like, Mom, I think I might be manic because genuinely like that, it will go from both ends of the extreme. It's like one day I'll wake up and I'm feeling on top of the freaking world and I'll be like, you are so badass. I love you so much. Like, God, you're awesome. Right. And then I'll have a like not so great day, or I won't be feeling too hot about myself. It won't even really be influenced by environment. It's just like my head, you know, and it's like, what are you doing with your life? Your future is not guaranteed. You have no support system. What are you doing? Like, it's just like, oh my God, I can't freaking catch a break. But no, I think that, you know, I have both ends. And when the first thing that I do when I feel myself starting to slip and like the old neural pathways trying to repave themselves, I just have to apply conscious awareness and take back the reins and being like, listen, we're not having this today. We're not doing it. You're awesome. And I love you.
Yeah. Well, I like the way you took it there, that second piece too. Like, you're awesome. I love you. Like, that's part of it too. I think whatever voice resonates with us. Cause for me, talking to ourselves in that third person, I think is really valuable, and catching ourselves when those sort of like shame moments of spirals and being like, you know, for myself, be like, all right, hey Nathan, what's going on right now? You're like, you're going all over the place. What's happening here? Where's this coming from? And really catching myself and talking to myself in the third person there. And I'm not the type to really hype myself up, maybe the way you are, the way you're like, oh, you're awesome, Gabby, you got this. So,
but a good conversation with yourself, like nothing compares. And sometimes I have had to wrestle with this idea until I got used to it enough and comfortable doing it. I love talking to myself in the mirror now. Like when I need a pep talk, or not even necessarily to gas myself up, but when I need a heart to heart, and sometimes I'll have those like toned down conversations where I'm like, girl, what's going on? How you feeling today? Like, totally. What do you need? How can I support you? It was funny. I was with my boyfriend the other week and we were in his bathroom and we were looking in the mirror, and I was like, I don't know what I was doing. And I was talking to myself in the mirror, and I was like, do you ever talk to yourself? I don't know how the conversation started. And he was like, well, honestly, not really. And then I asked him, I was like, okay, say 3 things that you love about yourself in the mirror right now. And it feels super weird at first. And he was like, this is really uncomfortable. What the heck? When you look yourself so deeply into the eyes in a mirror and you talk to yourself, it's kind of surreal. It's like, whoa.
It is. Oh, totally. When I first started the practice, one of the things I did was I set a timer for myself for 2 minutes, you know, and that was literally like, because the part about that, it was so hard and to do at first. And it's like, why is this hard? I'm setting a timer for literally 2 minutes. I'm going to talk to myself in the mirror and try and say nice things to myself and like hype myself up and like look at my eyes. That you're right. That was odd too. I was having like a moment with myself in a way that felt very surreal. It's
so powerful though.
Yes. But the part about it too is like where that tension is that's that shame there. Cause I remember one of the things that got me was like, why does it feel like the world's going to explode when I do this? Like, why does this feel like something major is being breached here? And that's because it's the survival instinct there that says like you're putting yourself in a very dangerous situation by having this conversation with yourself, because you're going to be
by letting yourself be seen, by letting yourself like step into the spotlight, almost like diverting the attention to all be on you. It's like, oh my God, is this okay?
By letting yourself be seen by yourself too. There's nobody else there.
It's so, well, it is, because it's like, okay, the person having the thoughts, that's, you know, one component of the mind, but the person, if we will call it a person, the witness that is observing the mind having the thoughts, there are these 2 elements. It's the conscious awareness, and then you have the actual thoughts themselves. And so you're so right. It's like when I allow my awareness, when I allow my spirit, my soul to gaze into this physical body, like the components of myself, there is a degree of course, we're all oneness, but that feeling of multiple entities almost, it's so interesting. It's almost kind of trippy. I'm like, whoa, I need to take myself away from this mirror right now.
That's the thing, right? And it's called like the 2 selves phenomenon, where there is like the self that's inside you and then the self that's outside of you that everybody else sees. And those aren't always aligned. Those can also be vastly different in so many different ways. And so many of our mental challenges really come from like how differently aligned those 2 selves would be, but also bring it back around to narrative leadership. Part of how we really can show up as leaders and really nail that ethos part of the ethos pathos logos is bringing those 2 selves connected to each other and really like being aligned with your vision and what you want for yourself and how you're showing up in the world and how you see yourself. Because That's
Yeah.
really what it all comes down to.
Absolutely. Okay, so talk to yourself is one thing. Anything else we got?
Well, so no, those two. So those like trauma-based awareness and
Yes.
Compassionate self-inquiry, I call it.
You're right. Yes.
And then the third part is to really just like treat yourself with unconditional high regard. And I'll even go so far as, be nice to yourself, obviously, and try and catch yourself in those shame spiral moments and not belittle yourself more. Because one of the things that we do so often is when we do mess up, our instinct is to be like, oh, fuck, I messed up. Like, I'm an idiot. I'm so dumb. And that's, that just kind of keeps you locked in the shame there, which is like, it's very satisfying to be in shame too, in a weird, perverse way.
Because it's comfortable. We're so used to it.
We're comfortable. And then also you don't have to do anything. Like, you can just be like, I'm just stuck in shame. Like, I don't have to like actually change anything. So holding yourself in that regard is like both catching yourself in those moments and being like, no, I screwed up, but whatever, that's fine. We'll do better next time. Like approaching it that way. But then also just like doing nice things for yourself the way you would for somebody you're with. And so sounds like you're in a relationship now. You're probably doing things for your partner that's like you get super excited to do and you want to do them for him, and maybe things you wouldn't necessarily do for someone else. But
absolutely. And it's so easy and it's fun and it's exciting. And it's like, oh my God, I absolutely love doing this. Like I always rank, like gift giving and acts of service kind of low on my love languages until I'm in a like deeply committed relationship. And I'm like, this is literally sets my heart on fire. Like, I just want to do things for you.
Yeah. And so take that same attitude though, and do that for yourself.
Yes.
Give whatever your love language is, give that to yourself, like gift giving or whatever. I always tell clients that are dealing with this, like, go take yourself out on a date. Like, what's a restaurant you've always wanted to try in town? Just go. Like, don't wait for a friend to go. Just go by yourself. I like hiking. It's one of my big things. I'm a big dude. I can hike alone wherever I want. So I go on like big long hikes by myself, and that's how I take care of myself. That's like me giving my love language back to myself. So
I love that so much.
Yeah, whatever that is for you, you got to do it. And offering yourself these, opportunities, like date yourself, is another way to look at it.
Yeah. And I know we hear that, right? And it sounds kind of like, cliche, you love yourself first, but it's when you look at it through the lens of love languages, I really like that, because then it's like, okay, actionable steps I can take to show myself love. The idea of loving yourself, it's like, okay, just because you love yourself doesn't mean you have to like yourself all the time. I don't love every little thing that my friends do, or, that other people in my family do, or whatever, but I still love them unconditionally. And it's the same thing with myself. Like, okay, you snoozed your alarm, you skipped the gym this morning. Don't love that you did that. Let's do better tomorrow. Still love you, but like, come on, I know you're better than this. But with the love languages, it's like, okay, if I know that my number one love language is quality time, when's the last time that I sat down with myself and I experienced something truly presently with myself? Like, when is the last time that I took myself out to eat, to grab a coffee, on a hike, And so then it's like, oh, great, actionable step I can take. I can love myself more.
Yep.
When's the last time I wrote a love letter to myself? I love writing letters, love writing love letters to other people. When's the last time you did this for yourself?
Yep, totally. Well, the love language piece was your idea. You're the one that threw that in there. So give yourself credit for that.
Sometimes I'm like, I don't even know where these words are coming from. You, me, source, who the hell knows?
It's in here somewhere.
Awesome. Okay. So can you tell me a little bit? I want to hear more about your story. So you got into storytelling. You know this profound impact that it has on the individuals and the corporations that learn how to effectively tell a story. So what are some of the personal experiences that you've had, maybe with some traumas in your life that you've been able to help rewire and heal through storytelling?
Yeah. Well, so I'll kind of give like a little bit of my story about how I got here too, to doing this work also. And I think that'll catch on, because one of the things that came up is, I was a very reserved person up until my mid 30s. I mean, I'm 48 now. Yeah, whatever that is. So, but I was very reserved up until my mid 30s. And I had a lot of, I had alcohol problems. I had a lot of different addiction problems and things like that. And I could be sort of outgoing and gregarious in certain situations. Like I was doing sales for a living back then, but to really show up as myself was completely terrifying for me.
Mm.
And I did somehow in the middle of that, like, manage to get a girlfriend, and we broke up. It was just sort of like rocked my whole world, and thought, okay, I got to fix things. I mean, it really was sort of a rock bottom moment in a way. And I had kind of this group that did these storytelling shows at bars here in San Diego, and I started getting involved with that. And it was really interesting to be in a supportive environment to share my stories. And I usually kind of shared funny ones. Like, one of them I shared was about how when I was in junior high, I thought the Grateful Dead was a metal band because all the like metalhead kids I went to school with started wearing Grateful Dead t-shirts and there's like skulls on them and stuff. And I was like, oh, Grateful Dead, they're a metal band for sure. And like, yeah, I was super into metal back then. So like, I told that story, things like that. And to just sort of stand up in front of your community and share your story about like who you are, it's an incredibly validating thing. And this goes back to kind of our instincts also as humans to be like, we are all part of this community. We are all together in this, and you build an identity around these stories that you are all listening to from each other and aligning around. And so that's what I kind of got the key to how powerful it was. And I started getting much more involved in this community and started actually like taking on a leadership role in this community and helping other people share their stories too. And this all, like, one thing led to another, where I got approached by different groups, like TEDx groups here in San Diego, that asked me to help them put their shows together. And then from there, I really was thinking about like my own life and my own sort of challenges, and being, at the time I was like early 40s or late 30s, early 40s, and just looking at my life and seeing like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I didn't expect this. I thought maybe I would be like married with kids right now, or I'd have a job at a certain level that I wasn't at the point. And a lot of those things were my own personal challenges I encountered. It wasn't quite, I didn't quite understand what these were. Like, I didn't understand about trauma until a couple of years ago, even though I was going to therapy and I had my own sort of mental health challenges. But also, I had gone through like these recessions and my career wasn't where I thought it would be. And I had a lot of shame and guilt around that. And I started to think about how like our world is really guided by these narratives of like, I have an expectation that I'm supposed to be a certain person by now, and I'm not there. That expectation completely comes from a narrative I inherited. I actually, like, for myself, I actually don't care. Like, my bills are being paid and that's fine. So but why do I feel like I failed somehow for not being able to get these certain places in life? And to take it a step further too, one of the things that really caught me also was this was when a lot of conversations were coming out about like racial politics and gender politics. And I'm a white male, that my life's been relatively comfortable in that regard. But I was struggling with these cultural narratives. And
you had a target on your back for a while, man.
Yeah, right.
Kind of still do, honestly.
It's fine. I'm fine with it. But like, if I'm struggling with these narratives, how are people that these narratives are sort of geared to help me, right? they're geared towards a sort of like white heteronormative suburban culture paradigm. And if I'm struggling with them, like, how are people that aren't really in that paradigm, how are they dealing with these narratives, And so I ended up starting this speaker series called The New Narrative. And the idea was around like TED Talks, but around social issues. And we talked about a different theme every month or every year. We had a big event every year. And so their community, like, how do we build communities? What do we need communities for? Another one was communication. Like, how do we actually like talk to each other and connect with each other? Another one was identity. So like, who are we? How do we understand ourselves? And so we did that. We did family, we did love, sex, and relationships, we did work, money. And I got people that told like really profound and interesting stories about being on the edge of these like ways of looking at the narratives of our world. And so, for example, when we did the love, sex, and relationships one, there are people, some of the speakers talked about like being polyamorous and how that was their life. Other speakers talked about being, one speaker was a refugee from Iraq and Syria, and also LGBTQ, but also identified as Muslim, and how all these different identities intersected with each other. And then we also had a speaker that was a woman that was a pastor at an evangelical church, and she was single and unmarried. And like, what does it mean to be like a single unmarried woman pastor, like out in the dating scene of an evangelical church, right? So all these things, and just to ask these questions about like, what do we really want? Like what is the difference between the narrative we inherited about like how we're supposed to be loving each other and showing up, and the reality that we really want? What is the narrative we inherited about like what our families are supposed to be and the reality that we want or could be possible? and I just did this as like a passion project. I wanted to have these conversations, so I did it. I should have done a podcast. That's one of my like weird regrets. I should have done this as a podcast, but I did this in events. Maybe I'll get back to the podcast. But what ended up happening from doing
Never
this,
too late.
I know, right? Yeah, exactly. I got the microphone, right? So,
Yeah.
so one of the things that ended up happening was I didn't even have this plan. Just people started to approach me after the events, or they'd say, hey, Nathan, we really liked how you were talking about storytelling and narrative. Could you come teach us? Could you come do this workshop at our organization for how we could tell better stories? And I had no idea what I was going to do. I was like, yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Say yes before you're ready. That's like my favorite piece of advice.
Yeah, exactly. But it was wild too, because I had no idea, that there was like a career I could make out of this. So the first couple of times I did it, I just did it for free. And then somebody's like, we're supposed to pay you. It's like, oh, like, I don't know, I've been here for like an hour, like $100, So, and then finally it wasn't until my fourth client was like, well, our budget's $2,400. Will that work? I'm like, okay. I had no idea that kind of money was there. So, so that was like, all right, well, I'm going to change my career now and do this. This is way better than what I was doing before, which I was doing nonprofit marketing before, which I did enjoy, but, it's just a much cooler opportunity to be in this world that I'm in now. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so cool how you just followed your heart and what you enjoyed to do. And then so beautiful to see how these opportunities just fall right into your lap when you follow your heart and you do what feels good in your spirit and your soul. It is amazing the kind of blessings that we just become attuned to, because that wavelength is so powerful. And yeah, I think that hearing about how you felt the impact of being accepted and seen and sharing your story in a community, I know that is such an inspiring feeling to want to share the same experience with others. So I am so glad that you followed your heart in that and that you're actively doing this. It's really cool. All right. So one of the last questions that I have for you about storytelling, what do you feel like is the biggest challenge when you're working with individuals or organizations in articulating their story? Maybe it's about who they are. Maybe it's about their vision or the product that they're selling. What do you feel are some common challenges?
Yeah. Well, there's so many, and we've touched on a lot of them, especially when it comes to individuals. So maybe I'll kind of take the organizational approach here. And so when it comes to organizations, one of the big challenges is it really kind of comes down to leadership on a certain level. And really creating a priority around this. And so when I work with organizations, one of the things we'll try and get to is like, all right, what are like the mission and values of your organization? And how is this showing up in the stories that are being told internally? And are these stories being like reiterated internally? So this is the narrative that you're creating within this organization about what you're doing. Because if that's not happening, what's going to happen is different stories going to be told, like gossip or whatever. And those stories are going to be the narrative about what's going on within the organization. And this needs to be a top-down thing. Leaders need to be sharing these stories. And I think what happens, and this is, partly I struggle with this too, is it takes some time and bandwidth and mental space to think about our stories and really plan out how we're going to be sharing them with the world, with each other, and within our organizations, and like be aligned on this. And we don't always give it enough priority, but if we're willing to really stop and think through this is why I developed narrative leadership as a way to make it a little bit more intuitive and intrinsic into how we showed up as like a practice, not so much like thinking about the stories per se, but to be attuned to like what your mission and values are and internalize those mission and values. And so when the stories emerge that align with those missions and values, you're turning around and you're telling them almost automatically, because you've done that work ahead of time to have the confidence, to have the understanding of who you are and that your story needs to be told. So when the opportunity comes up, you're telling the story. It's just happening. It's coming out. As opposed to sitting down where like organizations really got to make time for this. So instituting that whole framework within an organization is like really valuable too. And that's how we become much more attuned to the stories that matter for us as individuals and organizations, and share them much more readily to build up that credibility around us, around who we are, so people can understand what we're up to and the vision we're trying to put out into the world.
Yeah. And I think as leaders, like you said, it really is the responsibility to remind the team of the collective why of that mission, because, we all need a why for why we're doing what we're doing. If you're a business owner, you definitely need a why. If you're an entrepreneur, you definitely need a why. But personally, you need a why in your relationships. You need a why in your hobbies.
Yep.
You need why does this matter to you? Because when we lose sight of that, then it's like, what am I doing? Then you question yourself, you question your identity, you question your work, your effort, your worth, everything.
Yep.
So I think as a leader, as a part of an organization, there is a collective why. And the more that we are reminded of that, the more that we can attach our daily, our weekly, our monthly, annual actions to the why, to the overarching mission, the more that we are able to infuse meaning into every conversation, every meeting, every, decision that is made. And that is what I believe keeps people grounded in the work that they do, keeps this degree of fulfillment alive because we're connected to a why. And yes, you have to take time to know the why of each individual if you're going to be an effective leader, for sure. And the strengths of each individual for that matter, but the collective why, so powerful. And I think telling the story of the mission goes hand in hand with keeping that alive.
Yep, exactly, 100%.
All right. So we're going to close up our conversation today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this and I am so excited to tell more stories. And I'm going to challenge all of you guys that are listening to this episode to tell a story this week. It doesn't have to be a fairy tale story like you may have thought of when you first started listening to this episode, but it can be a story that you share with a loved one, or maybe it is a coworker about who you are, or maybe what you're going through, or maybe a recent experience that you had. Maybe it was an experience that you had at the grocery store and it was funny and you're telling a silly story. Maybe it's a little bit heavier and you have gone through something in the last couple months that you need to get off of your heart. Tell your story, share your vision, share with someone that you care about and that you believe will receive you the way that you deserve to be received, about your vision, about your ideas for what you want to create. It is so powerful when we speak these things into existence. And I something that's coming through to bring up, I listened to a Joe Dispenza podcast this morning at the gym, and he was talking about how emotion is the final element of this kind of timeline of experience, belief, thought, habit, emotion, whatever. So emotion is the last component. And so when you're telling your story, if you can really allow yourself to feel into your story and validate who you are and the dreams that you have for the future, for your vision, when you feel that emotion, that is the most powerful thing that you can do for validating yourself and your story, but manifesting your future to come into fruition is really feeling into that emotion, which requires you to be present and to tell your story. So I challenge all of you guys to do that. I know that I'm going to make an effort to do that as well. And Nathan, as we close up today, if there's anything else that's on your heart, it doesn't even have to be advice, but anything else that you want to share, and then letting listeners know how they can connect with you as well.
Well, I'll kind of carry on like what you just said here too, is you are the first and most important audience for your own stories. So recognizing that that's part of what's happening here in this whole dynamic of storytelling and how we're relating to the world is like, there's two of you inside you, and one of you is talking to the other, and you're the most important audience for your own stories inside yourself. So that's the last piece I'll leave there. I think it's valuable to leave with the audience here.
Nathan, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for listening. Go out there, tell your story, and make sure you tune in for the next Crucial Conversation, which will be live in about 2 weeks from today. Awesome. Love you all. Hey, y'all. Before you head out, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode, and most importantly, thank you for making the conscious decision to invest in yourself and expand your mind. By doing so, you are helping to elevate us all to live better lives. By showing up and emulating the things that you learned in today's Crucial Conversation, you are inspiring those around you. If you want to continue this domino effect, share this episode with someone that you want to help to unlock their maximum potential. And connect with me on Instagram at Gabby Rosalie Co. to share your valuable feedback and offer recommendations for what you'd like to hear in future episodes. I love you all. Keep shining your unique lights, and I will see you next time on the Crucial Conversations podcast.